Tom Weaver back again with extra trivia about Monster from the Ocean Floor. First of all, if you want to know more about the one-man submarine, go to Google and type in Aerojet General plus the word submarine, and the first thing that popped up for me anyway, is a one-page article from Life magazine, August 3, 1953, Nicole Moray, the future star of The Day of the Triffids, on the cover. Anyway, it's a one-page article with color pictures, all about the company and its new sub. I think it's possible that that's the article that inspired Corman to contact Aerojet General and make Monster from the Ocean Floor. And here, out of the Hollywood Reporter, is the initial blurb alerting the world that Corman's first monster movie was in the works. October 6, 1953, actor-writer Wyatt Ordung was assigned yesterday to direct his first movie, Palo Alto's The Sea Demon, an original by William Banch. No release set for the film, which rolls at Ensenada, Mexico, October 17. It features Ann Kimball and Stuart Wade. And then on November 2, 1953, the Hollywood Reporter ran an item titled, Ordung Wines Sea Demon. Quote, writer Wyatt Ordung wound up his first directorial assignment on Palo Alto's The Sea Demon over the weekend, unquote. One tricky thing that Roger did that he talked about a little on the other track, he didn't have quite as many crew members on the movie as the Hollywood unions would have liked, so he'd have been very happy not to have the fact that he was making a movie mentioned in the Hollywood trades. But at least one of the trades found out and phoned him, and he had to say something, and so what he told them wasn't too accurate. He gave them the wrong title, and, this is the best part, he said he'd be shooting it in Mexico. Why? I'm sure because he was hoping that union representatives reading the Hollywood trades, maybe with an eye out for maverick producers like him, wouldn't bother to look at, say, the Hollywood Reporter's weekly list under the heading of, quote, productions abroad. If you look at the Hollywood Reporter's list of productions abroad during the time that his movie was shooting, you'll see 4 movies shooting in London: Duel in the Jungle with Dana Andrews and Gene Crane, The Black Knight with Alan Ladd, The Ghost of O'Leary with David Niven, Yvonne DiCarlo, and Barry Fitzgerald, which came out in America as Tonight's the Night, The True and the Brave with Clark Gable, Lana Turner, and Victor Mature, which came out here as Betrayed. Oh, and The Sea Demon, shooting at Ensenada, Mexico, with the producer given as Robert Corman. It looks as though Corman didn't even tell them his real name. The motion picture exhibitor was fooled. When the picture came out, their review began, filmed mostly on the coast of Mexico, ... According to the Mark Thomas McGee book Faster and Furiouser, quote, Wyatt Ordung was washing dishes and hauling garbage at Alfonso's restaurant when Corman met him, unquote. Jonathan Hayes, who's in the picture playing the part of Joe, told McGee, quote, we shot for 6 days at the beach. Barney being Wyatt Ordung, Barney was allergic to seagulls. Every time one flew by, he wanted to throw up, unquote. Also in Film Facts, Jonathan Hayes talked about the movie. He mentioned the fact that he was working at a gas station at the time, and, quote, a little guy named Wyatt Ordung used to come in all the time in an old beat-up car, and we talked. He told me he was a writer, and that he was going to do a movie with Roger Corman, a guy who hadn't done any movies yet. Anyway, one day Wyatt came into the gas station and said that it was all set. He was going to do this movie and could get me a part in it, but I had to grow a mustache. So I grew the mustache and got fired from the gas station for having it. But I got the part, and that was Roger's first movie, Monster from the Ocean Floor. I think we shot it in 5 days, but it was very exciting. I got to go to Catalina and sail around on some boats and do some scuba diving. I think basically I came to California to play cowboys and Indians, and really, that's what I was doing, unquote. While interviewing Corman, I kept referring to a Fangoria interview with Wyatt Ordung. I should mention here that it was conducted by Johnny Legend, and Johnny Legend said it was a unique experience. He told me he went over to Ordung's place, and I guess he was a few minutes late, which was unfortunate, because at the time that Johnny was supposed to be there, Ordung started interviewing himself. The interview in print begins with Johnny Legend saying, The interview in print begins with Johnny Legend saying, Hi, Wyatt, and Ordung saying, Have a seat. So anyway, I wanted to get into Hollywood as an actor, and for 18 years I knocked my brains out, and it goes on from there. So everything that Ordung said from the time that Johnny Legend was supposed to be there until the time that Johnny Legend showed up is now lost to the ages. Some of the other people in the movie: Dick Pinner, who plays Dr. Baldwin, was in It Came From Outer Space. He was one of the reporters mocking Richard Carlson in a scene set at the rim of the crater. Inez Palange, who plays the witch-type woman in Ocean Floor, was an old-timer. She went back almost to silent days. You might remember her as the mother of Paul Muni in Scarface. Roger Corman is in the movie briefly as Tommy, a member of Steve's crew. Alfred Hansen, who did the underwater photography, later played the monster in The Phantom from 10,000 Leagues, according to Johnny Legend's interview with Wyatt Ordung in Fangoria. Playing the small part of Joe is Jonathan Hayes. It was his first picture, as I mentioned a moment ago, and he went on to work as an actor for Corman many, many more times, most famously as the star of Little Shop of Horrors. And Hayes also worked behind the scenes on various movies and even produced a couple movies. Stuart Wade is someone I wish I knew more about, someone I feel I should know more about, because he was the star of Monster from the Ocean Floor, he was the star of Teenage Monster with Ann Gwynn, and he also played small parts in other horror and sci-fi movies. He sings in both Ocean Floor and Teenage Monster, which gave me the feeling that he might have been a singer in real life, and I turned out to be correct. Laura Wagner of Classic Images magazine confirmed that for me, but she also couldn't tell me much about Wade. She emailed me, quote, "His solo singing career was very minor and didn't seem to last long. I mean, so minor that the solo records I do have of his are on labels I've never heard of," unquote. One song he sang way back in the day was Over the Rainbow. That was around the time of the release of the movie The Wizard of Oz, I believe. Then in the 1950s, perhaps starting with Monster from the Ocean Floor, he began appearing in features and also worked in TV. And then, as far as I can determine anyway, he disappeared from movie history. And I've built my way up to the star of the movie, Ann Kimball. I wanted very much to talk with her, but this commentary job came along at a time when I was very busy and she was even busier. I do intend to interview her about it, but it'll be in print and it'll go into one of the magazines I write for. However, she was interviewed in Film Facts by Michael Barnum, and quite extensive interview about her whole career. She started in the mid-40s playing small parts and moved on to bigger roles at Monogram and other studios, and some of the things she told him about Monster from the Ocean Floor. Film Facts, Mike Barnum, how did you get the part in Monster from the Ocean Floor? Kimball. Roger Corman, who was just starting out, was in the same office building as my agent, Gene Halliburton, right over the Cock and Bull on Sunset Boulevard. He had rented a very small office in the corner, and Gene said to me that there was this nice young man who was going to make his first picture, and he is getting the money together, etc. Roger looked very preppy. He wore the saddle shoes and cashmere sweaters and slacks. He didn't dress like most young men did from Hollywood in those days. He had a lot of charm. Gene said, "I think we really ought to help him, and I think you ought to try out for this movie that he is doing. He can't pay very much money, but he'll give you a portion of the picture," unquote, which seemed not too bad. So he got me, and he got Floyd Crosby, who was a very fine cameraman. He got good people, because it was just at the time when television was coming in, and nobody quite knew what was going to happen. Some of the major studios had begun to let go of some of their really good technical people, so he was able to get some pretty good technical people, and certainly a good photographer, and he got all of us for minimum salary and a portion of the picture. Continuing to talk to Barnum, she mentioned how cold the water was, and continued, "On the last day," Roger said, "Now about the scene where you fight the shark." I said, "Roger, I'm not fighting a shark." And he said, "Oh no, Ann, it is a very old shark." So again I said, "Well, Roger, I am not fighting a shark." He said, "We're going to put a net around it, Ann. It can't hurt you, and it practically doesn't have any teeth. Besides, the thing we really have to be careful about is that this is a valuable shark, and..." and she laughed. So when you watch the movie, the lady fighting the shark is not me. It is the wife of photographer Al Hansen, who lived and worked on Catalina Island. His wife, who was also a deep-sea diver, fought the shark. Roger showed the movie. This is Ann Kimball continuing to talk to Michael Barnum. Roger showed the movie briefly in the theaters. Then he cut it and sold it to TV and made a lot of money to start his own picture career. Unfortunately, those of us that had started on commission never got much money because our commission was going to be on theatrical release, not the television part. So anytime I talk to someone who knows Roger, I say, "Tell Roger he still owes me money." Michael Barnum asks, "Do you recall your leading man, Stuart Wade?" And Kimball answered, "Yes, I remember that I could stay underwater a lot longer than he could, and we were in the water a lot. I could stay down for 45 minutes to almost an hour, and Stuart could stay down only about 25 minutes. That was because of his body mass, because he was heavier than I was. I really enjoyed that experience of learning to scuba dive, although I almost froze to death because it was really cold. But it was so fascinating to be down in the water and to see everything. You know, people didn't scuba dive that much in those days. Fortunately, the photographer, Al Hansen, was a deep-sea diver, and he had developed the first underwater camera. He shot it using a deep-sea diving suit, and the rest of us had these tanks on our backs. And then there was that silly little submarine that we had managed to borrow from somebody. They had a terrible time figuring out what to make the monster look like. They didn't have very much money, and I think the whole movie was made for like $9,000 or some ridiculous amount. At the preview, Roger said rather glumly, "It looks just like a light globe, a goddamned light globe." I thought it looked like a light globe too. The other thing that happened is that the soundtrack was bad, and they didn't have the money to fix it. I don't know if you noticed it, but sometimes in the film my voice gets very low, and that simply is because the sound was shot on location. They were doing it on a shoestring. Roger probably cut the worst parts out, though. Michael Barnum asks, "Your role in Monster from the Ocean Floor is a very strong female character." And Kimball answered, "Yes, she really was, and she was going to go down there and get that monster whether they wanted her to or not. You know, you really have to give Roger this. I mean, he is not a bad guy at all. He is just a businessman. He came into the motion picture business as a businessman at the very beginning. He gave a lot of people chances to do things. A lot of directors got their first chance to direct with Roger. As long as you could make it within the amount of time and money that he had budgeted for, he would let you try almost anything, and there are not many people who would have done that in those days. You have to remember also that this was in the time of the big studios. There weren't a lot of independent productions at that time. If you had an independent movie, it was very chancy that you would ever get it released, because the major studios also controlled the means of distribution. So if you were MGM or Warner Brothers or somebody like that, then you had a chain of theaters that released your product, and if you were a little independent filmmaker, your chances of ever getting that picture released nationally were very slim." And that was Ann Kimball talking to Michael Barnum in Film Facts magazine. As you can tell by listening to the Corman commentary, I certainly tried to get him to unload on Wyatt Ordung a little. I told him all the not nice things Ordung had said about him, but Roger the imperturbable gentleman wouldn't bite. I tried to get him to retell an Ordung anecdote he told in his autobiography, but again, he wouldn't go there. So I'll go there. Roger Corman, How I Made 100 Movies in Hollywood and Never Lost a Dime, page 20. When you make a picture as quickly and as raggedly as we made Monster from the Ocean Floor, things always go wrong. For instance, I helped build a camera platform so we could shoot from out in the ocean, then lugged it out into the surf. My director didn't want to help me. "I can't carry that platform," he said, "because I'm the director." I couldn't believe this. "Barney," I said, "I'm the producer. Just grab the other side." Barney let me know how he felt. He dropped his side. It fell and hit me. Go to www.monsterkid.com and click on Classic Horror Film Boards for the world's greatest cyber conversations about all the old horror and sci-fi movies. One of the many contributors to that site, a guy going way back Classic Horror Film Board-wise, is Buzz Dixon, who has quite a lengthy IMDb list of movie and TV credits as a writer, mostly for cartoon TV series. And on April 10, 2009, in the Monster from the Ocean Floor thread, he posted about the screenwriter of Monster from the Ocean Floor, Bill Danch, quote, "I worked with Bill Danch, the scriptwriter of Monster from the Ocean Floor, back when I was first starting in animation at Filmation Studios. Bill had been a radio writer, including Fibber, McGee, and Molly, and he was trying to break into films as radio faded. Monster was meant to cash in on the sci-fi craze, and while intended as a low-budget film, it certainly wasn't meant to be a no-budget film. Bill was quite bitter about the production decades later. He told me that Corman never paid any residual payments owed on the film. Further, distributors frequently booked Monster as a double bill with bigger films. Ben-Hur was one specific example Bill cited, since they could get Monster ultra cheap and siphon off 50% of the revenues of the bigger film. Bill said he and his accountant sued to get Corman to open his books. Corman showed him the books, which consisted of 3 china barrels of loose papers, receipts, and checks stored in a Beacon's warehouse. Bill and his accountant were told all the Monster paperwork was in there somewhere. All they had to do was find it. They decided it wasn't worth the effort and dropped the suit. Unquote. And again from the Mark Thomas McGee book Faster and Furiouser, The first time an audience saw Monster from the Ocean Floor was pre-Robert Lippert and Lippert Films at the California Theater when the title was still It Stalked the Ocean Floor. Quote, the preview audience, which had been quietly bored, suddenly came alive with laughter when the title character made its first appearance on the screen. Somebody in the audience yelled, "It looks like my wife's diaphragm." The film's producer, Roger Corman, and its director, Wyatt Ordung, sank in their back row seats, unquote. That was the point, according to McGee, when they hired marionette maker Bob Baker to create a monster for their movie. McGee wrote, quote, for an extremely modest fee, he made something that looked like a one-eyed octopus. It was not very good, and it did not look like the amoeba described in the script, but at least it did not look like a diaphragm, unquote. When I interviewed Roger Corman for the other commentary track, he was a little hazy when I asked him questions about the monster. It was kind of unproductive back and forth, so unproductive, frankly, that I deleted it. So to get more info about the star of the movie, the monster itself, I contacted Bob Baker, a guy who's been involved in the movie industry for over 80 years now. He started out as a kid playing tiny parts in Our Gang comedies, the Jackie Cooper movies Skippy and Sookie, etc., and when he was about 19, he got the job of making the marionette of a deep-sea diver, 18 to 20 inches tall, for a PRC movie called Isle of Forgotten Sins. He says that on the set, they had 2 fish tanks with fish in them, and this marionette was in the dry space between the 2 fish tanks, bouncing around as though it was a guy walking on the seafloor. You can look up some of his other puppet credits on IMDb. If you're a horror and monster movie fan, the titles that'll jump out at you include Bluebeard with John Carradine. Baker did the puppet show. He puppeteered the Angry Red Planet's Bat Rat Spider. He worked on Star Trek's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, on and on. You can also go to his website, bobbakermarionettes.com, and read about him and his career in the Marionette Theater, 1345 West 1st Street, Los Angeles, that he's been running for decades. The theater was founded by Baker and his business partner, Alton Wood, who died about 10 years ago. According to Baker, Roger Corman's attempt at a monster was, quote, terrible. It was like a balloon that came out of the ocean, unquote. And the company that was going to be releasing the movie said, you get a monster and we'll release your film. So in 2 installments, you'll know what I mean in a minute, Baker made a monster, the octopus we see in the movie. The underwater scenes were shot dry for wet, of course, on a little ocean floor set at a photography studio on Beverly Drive in Beverly Hills. But even that monster turned out to be unacceptable to somebody, either Corman himself or, more likely, this is me guessing now, probably the guys who would be releasing the movie. So Baker was called upon to make the monster look, his words, more elaborate. It was the same monster prop, but they enhanced it a bit. One of the things Baker remembered doing the second time around was giving it warts, and the warts were glued on jujubes. Either Baker's first monster or the second one, or both, had tentacles that were really ostrich feathers. The second time the monster was photographed, it was done in Baker's own garage on New Hampshire Street in the old Wilshire district. And Baker still, after 60 years, thinks it was hilarious that Corman looked at the underwater set, which included plants that were supposed to be seaweed, or maybe it was seaweed. Anyway, Corman said, "Oh, you've got to put water on these leaves so they look wet." And Baker said, "Everything underneath the ocean is wet. You don't see any drops of water on anything." Corman had to be talked out of having droplets of water on the seaweed so that audiences could tell it was supposed to be underwater. There was also sand on the underwater set, and some of it must have fallen on the garage floor, and Baker's other memory of Corman is of him picking grains of sand up off the garage floor and sprinkling them back onto the set. At one point, Baker's business partner, Alton Wood, said, "Who the heck is he?" And Baker said, "He's the producer." And Alton Wood said, "Whoops." Baker wanted close-ups of the monster. He felt that the monster scenes could be really frightening if the camera was close enough that the monster's tentacles were lashing out right into the lens of the camera. He says he begged that it be shot that way, but Corman made it a long shot, and Baker was never happy with the way it was shot. The monster was made by Baker and his associate Morton Hack, H-A-A-C-K, a guy who had already designed costumes for Broadway shows and who went on to become a costume designer for the movies. Hack got Oscar nominations for The Unsinkable Molly Brown, Planet of the Apes, and What's the Matter with Helen, and also worked on Billy Rose's Jumbo, Games, and other movies. Baker says it was from 18 to 22 inches tall, maybe taller. The main part of the thing, the head, was made out of sponge, and the eye pulses with light because there was a little light bulb in it. And they used a dimmer, I guess a rheostat kind of thing, to make it brighter, less bright, brighter, less bright. Hack made the underwater set. The monster was on strings, a marionette, with Baker doing the puppeteering. And Baker says that when the movie came out, he and Alton Wood, the business partner, went to one of the theaters that was showing it, and, quote, "I couldn't get out of there fast enough." Baker added, quote, "I saw Monster from the Ocean Floor one time on television, and the monster looked pretty good on television. But in the movies, on the big screen, it was hokey. It was terrible. It was the most disappointing thing I've ever worked on," unquote. Bob Baker's theater is currently, December 2012, doing the Nutcracker, and if you live out there and can attend a performance at the Bob Baker Marionette Theater, I bet it'd be a real kick. Baker is currently writing his autobiography and, quote, "I'm dickering with myself on whether I'm going to put everything I know about Hollywood in it or not." And he laughed the kind of laugh that people laugh when they've been in Hollywood as many years as Bob Baker has and knows where a lot of the bodies are buried. Again, according to Faster and Furiouser, Corman approached James H. Nicholson about Monster from the Ocean Floor. Nicholson was trying to start his own distribution company, but what Nicholson, proposed didn't excite Corman. Corman's next move was ultimately covered in The Hollywood Reporter, and again I quote, "Hollywood Reporter, March 16, 1954, Lippert Pictures has closed a deal with producer Roger Corman to distribute his Monster from Beneath the Sea. The science fiction feature has been set for May release. Picture was directed by Wyatt Ordung, with Ann Kimball and Stuart Wade heading the cast under the shooting title of It Stalked the Ocean Floor." And in October 1953, just to give you an insight into Robert Lippert, in October 1953, The Hollywood Reporter ran an article by Lippert titled Reflecting Showmanship, and it's a great read, and here's part of it. This is Robert Lippert writing. "Call me old-fashioned, if you will, but in my experience, the primary consideration in successful showmanship must be careful attention to the stock items. Front and lobby displays, trailers, posters, the street ballet and sidewalk stunt, heralds, newspaper contests, window tie-ups, and of course ads and publicity. I take pride, not to mention profit, in the fact that my 64 theaters have always operated on the basis of showmanship first. When my partners and I engage a house manager, we do not look for a popcorn salesman, a ticket taker, or an accountant. We want a hustler who understands the value of publicity, advertising, and exploitation, and who will go out into the community to get the last dollar out of every situation, to the mutual benefit of the distributor and ourselves. We have proved again and again the practicality of this approach. The most striking individual example I can recall took place last year, which would be 1952, on a money-making Lippert Pictures release, Outlaw Women, in Sanger, California, a town of 2,500, where the picture was really sold. Our theater did more business than the same film did in San Jose, a city of 75,000, where there was no campaign at all. Yes, even today, the smart exhibitor won't hesitate to spend money. To give a small example, but I think a significant one, space helmets are being offered for sale as an added exploitation gimmick on our science fiction release Spaceways. At $2.50 each in quantity, this is hardly an inexpensive giveaway, even for a deluxe theater. Yet on the basis of orders still coming in, this is one of the most popular items we have ever offered." Unquote. And if you want to know more about Lippert, the documentary maker Daniel Griffith is working on a feature-length documentary, The Incredible Mr. Lippert, The Life and Times of a B-Movie Distributor. And in my books of interviews, there are, in various books, some quite lengthy interviews with various cohorts of his. Director Edward Burns, who did Return of the Fly and Space Master X7 for Lippert, among others. Bernard Glasser, who produced the Burns pictures. Writer Harry Spalding, director Maury Dexter, and others. In his Fangoria interview, Wyatt Ordung said that the Variety review said, "Wyatt Ordung's surprisingly good direction keeps this picture moving from start to finish," unquote. That's what he said, Variety said. Since Wyatt Ordung started the Fangoria interview before the interviewer arrived at his house, and since Ordung talks in the interview about having been eaten by vultures in a past life, I didn't believe him. And I was half wrong. Variety didn't say what he said they said, but it was a pretty positive review. Quote, "Here's an oddity, a well-done quickie. Lensed entirely along the coast of Lower California, Monster from the Ocean Floor boasts an interest-holding storyline, good direction and performances, with an added plus factor being a tag that's fully exploitable. One of the picture's better points is the performance turned in by Ann Kimball. She's an actress of extreme capability, a looker to boot, and should go far. As her vis-a-vis, Stuart Wade is good, but still overshadowed by Miss Kimball. Supporters have comparatively little to do, save for Dick Pinner, who's okay as Wade's sidekick. Roger Corman's production supervision has packed the footage with commercial values without going overboard, while Wyatt Ordung's surprisingly good direction has drawn all suspense from the William Danch screenplay. Film, incidentally, is made up completely of exteriors, with utilization of good setting making the footage belie its budget. And that was Variety's Neil. The monster looks like a one-eyed octopus in the movie, and on the poster it looks exactly like a one-eyed octopus, big and green and crawling up onto a beach or something and grabbing a blonde woman in a white bathing suit. Funnily enough, when Creature from the Black Lagoon played in Ruston, Louisiana in May 1954, the theater showing it ran an ad in the local paper. The ad had the title Creature from the Black Lagoon, but the octopus and the blonde artwork was for Monster from the Ocean Floor. And by the way, Monster from the Ocean Floor is a perfect title for someone, say Robert Lippert, who might be trying to invite confusion with Creature from the Black Lagoon, or maybe The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. Both of them were big, big, big money makers, and the title Monster from the Ocean Floor really smacks of both. And in conclusion, I hold in my hands a New York Daily News article from April 12, 1964. There's no ghoul like an old ghoul, writing about how popular the old monster movies are and monster toys are, etc., etc., the monster craze of the 60s. And one section of the article is titled, Giant Octopus Put Corman in Business. This is 1964. I'm quoting from the article. Roger Corman, who directs the Poe stories for release by AIP, majored in electrical engineering at Stanford University, did postgraduate work at Oxford, then found he preferred the movies and theater. And this is a quote from Corman in the article. I decided to have a go at a scare picture, and I did one with a submarine and a giant octopus, which was an atomic mutation, he says. Quote, it cost me about $18,000 and grossed $300,000. That did it for me. I was in the business of directing scare pictures from then on. The field was wide open for newcomers, unquote. He made Monster from the Ocean Floor in 1953, which means 2013 is the start of his 7th decade as a movie producer. Congratulations, Roger. Thank you very much. I'm Tom Weaver.